Okay, folks, good morning. Those of you that joined us a little earlier today for some painting, um, one of the things that we touched upon, of course, when we had to cut off, because if you're not aware, on Saturday mornings, I have kind of a short painting session time available, and that is because my daughter does swim practice pretty early in the morning, and so I only got about an hour and 15 minutes or so to do that portion. But one of the things that we touched upon when people started coming in is about Audible. I do quite a bit of Audible reading and to and from work, and I used to do it a lot when I was painting, but really doing the painting videos does a better job of keeping me on track for that. And so I want to talk a little bit about that because it kind of is a little bit. I've got some opinions on that. I've done quite a few of them, and I figured I'd share my experience with them. I am sitting here at the public park, so hopefully we won't have any strange cats that'll come by and have here outside the car. But I've got about an hour or so before the daughter is ready to go. So, and why am I not watching her? Well, we're in this new age. I can't go in and watch my own daughter practice. So, anyhow, that's the new normal. So, I wanted to share my experience with Audible. I'm not sponsored by them or anything. I don't want to be. Not that they've asked me or anything, but I have been a member. Maybe 10 years ago, I did it for like a year. And I think recently, in the last 5 years, 4 years, something like that, I've kept that thing going. So I've gone through quite a few books. They're war game related books, of course. There are some things that I have read that are not necessarily war game related. I'll go ahead and get those out of the way. I don't really do fiction. And so basically what it works is you pay about $15 a month, and with that $15 a month you get an audio book free. Well, you paid for it, but the audiobooks, if you buy them individually, can be anywhere between uh, 50, I guess 15, 20, $45 or whatever. So if you're going to go through them, it's worth it, in my opinion. And you get one credit a month that you can use for any of the books. So it doesn't matter if the book is say an hour long, which there are some that are really that short, or 38 hours long, or even longer. There's I think The Fall of the Roman Empire by the famous book. That's super, super long, and there's some really, really long ones. But um, most of them that are interested in fall somewhere in between, say, 12 to 30 hours usually. So, to and from work, I usually do that. So I'm consuming maybe an hour each day. I used to paint and have that in the background, but what happens is that it's easy for me to get sidetracked into something else. Whereas if I'm doing the painting video, even though it may not be that useful, it does keep me on track. And I've mentioned that before, is that's really, I really do it just so I can stay on topic and don't go look at, hey, look at this YouTube video, or go in a different direction. So my Audible recommendation, we touched on that a little bit, and these are things, I'm only going to go over the books that I've actually completed, which is actually most of them. There is 4 or 5 books that I've started, and for whatever reason I didn't finish. I guess I could talk about those as well, and why I wasn't able to stay on task and finish them. The only nonfiction books I've done is I did do the 2 Jurassic Park books. I think at the time I was doing my little dinosaur painting thing, and I figured, let me have something dinosaur theme while I'm painting. And what was interesting about those is specifically the first one, how it varied from the movie. In some ways, it is, most people that read books and watch movies, I really don't have a big history of that, because most of the books that I read, they don't make movies out of. But this one I had the opportunity that, and I actually thought the movie was better than the book. The book focused a lot on the raptor stuff, which, if you're a dinosaur fan, or I grew up, that was my first love as growing up as a kid, and then in the mid to late 70s was was dinosaurs. If they would have had all those movies now, I would have just gone. When I was a kid, I would have just gone ape shit, you know. But they didn't have them. You know, to me, dinosaurs aren't raptors. That's who gives a crap about that. I mean, you know, so it focused a little too much on that in the book. I thought the movie was probably better, but it was interesting to see the commonality that they had. What followed kind of the same pattern of the actual storyline of the book versus the movie and what the differences were. So that was kind of interesting to. I recommend you guys read the first one if you haven't already, or have it, or as I like to say, have it read to you, because I don't really have the time to read. The problem with reading books, and I love books, there's nothing like grabbing an actual book, but the problem is I am, if there's any outside noise or anything like that, like I couldn't read at an airport. I would be constantly distracted into, hey, what's this over here, or what's that over there, or yeah, I get distracted easy. And you can't paint and drive and do other, well, I've seen people go down the road reading an actual book. Scary, I know, but I can't do it. So Audible allows me to get through it. And but anyhow, that's really the only nonfiction thing I've read on Audible. So I know some of you guys are probably into that. I'm not opposed to it. I know there's some historical fiction related stuff, especially in pre-Norman England. There's some series that are done by that, and a lot of like Imperial Roman type, where they kind of make up the story, almost kind of like the movie Gladiator. Obviously, not not with the gladiatorial stuff, but there's stuff that follows fictitious characters, and so you have kind of the historical setting, but then the details are stray from that. Maybe like the Rome miniseries from HBO. That's kind of that way, where they get the main portions are things that actually happen, and they kind of fill in the gaps with fiction. I'm okay with that as historical fiction, as I like to call it. But I really haven't read any of those things. Okay, so going through, I know I've mentioned my absolute favorite one. I'm going to skip right to the beginning because this book, I can't say enough about this book. It's a book called, I actually didn't read it on here because it's easy for me to remember. The Ghosts of Cannae by, I believe his last name is O'Donnell, McConnell, something like that. It is an excellent book. With Audible, one thing that's important is the book needs to be interesting, and also the narrator needs to do a good job. Not everybody's a good narrator. Just like when you were in school, not everybody can get in front of the class and talk in front of people, you know? So some people are not interesting, or they don't work for me, or what have you. So take that with a grain of salt. Now, one thing you can do is you can always have them play a little sample. So if I recommend something and you go, well, that sounds interesting, let's see if Tony knows what he's talking about. Click on the little sample. And if the person's voice just doesn't work for you, well, then it doesn't work for you. One thing I will say, that if you're talking about a lot of these historical texts, historical books, especially historical texts, so you're talking about Livy, Polybius, Josephus, Arian, those kinds of original texts, there is one particular narrator that does not work for me. And his name is Charlton Griffin. He's prolific and he does a lot of things, and he has this accent that seems like he's from the UK, but I think he's from Oregon or whatever. And so it's like this pompous. I have nothing against English accents. I actually prefer them, but this guy he mispronounces everything, and it's extremely distracting. I mean, he mispronounces everything, and it's almost like he does it on purpose, but I know he doesn't. But so I've avoided everything from him. The last thing that I got from him was Josephus's The Jewish War, which covers basically the Levant between the time of Herod and all that stuff. And it's a really interesting story. It's extremely complicated. People switching sides, and brothers fighting brothers, and half brothers, and all that kind of stuff. And I kept reading reading it over and over again, and I was like getting lost, and he was mispronouncing even the most basic things, and I'm like, I just can't deal with it anymore. Unfortunately, one thing they do is, if you can actually return the book if you do it within like a month or something like that, but I waited longer than that, so I ended up having to eat it. So I may at some point re-get that book, because the story I think is really interesting. It focuses on some armies that I'm particularly kind of interested in doing, because one of the armies that's in that area is one of Luke's favorite armies, the Arameans, and it works in that whole area. So I wanted to read a little bit more about that, and but the story's good, but the narrator just didn't work for me. Okay, so definitely Ghosts of Cannae. If you haven't picked that up, that is an excellent book. Now the thing about it is that the title is deceiving, because you think like, oh, I don't want to read about the Battle of Cannae. I mean, that's the one battle that, you know, all kinds of stuff has been done about it. It's been done till the cows come home. Well, that may be what the story is, but the battle is kind of in the center of the story. In other words, the middle of the book is where that battle takes place. So it goes all the way to the beginning. That starts with the Punic Wars, and the First Punic War. So it goes through all that and the characters that play in that, and of course the Second Punic War, culminating in the Battle of Cannae, and then finishing that up all the way into the Third Punic War. So the nice thing is you have this one 20-hour book, 20-something hour book that covers all of the major Polybius and Livy and all the stuff that can be pulled from different characters in one source. So, and the story is really interesting. It's a subject matter that most people that are in ancient stuff is very interested in, and with that whole kind of one of those classic world wars between Rome and Carthage. And yeah. Oh, hello, Greg. Yes, my daughter is at swim practice, so I figured, you know, I didn't flap my jaws enough this morning, so I wanted to go ahead and get some more in. And we talked about the recommendation. We were talking about Audible, and I couldn't access my recommendations because I am the world's worst about passwords. So I have them. If you guys ever want to hack me, you know, you can hack my phone and get all my passwords, because I don't remember them. But I had it on my phone and I couldn't access my reading list while I was online. So I went ahead and jotted these down, and then we could talk about them here, because I've got about another 45 minutes here. So anyhow, so of all the books I've ever read on Audible, which is about, I'm going to say 40 or something like that, my favorite one is definitely Ghosts of Cannae. It is awesome. The narrator is spectacular, and he does a great job. Okay, let me get my pencil so I can cross off these things as we talk about them. The other one that I mentioned to Marco to pick up and he liked it, was called The Poison King, and it is about the life of Mithridates, the Pontic ruler. And that's kind of an interesting book. It's kind of a biography / historical thing, and it's a good one as well. Good narrator as well. Recommend that one. I've done the book I was talking about earlier about the Conquistador. It's actually called Conquistador by Buddy Levy. Most of these, the author does not narrate the book. There's an exception to that, and I'll get to that one when I come to it. But it's a shame that doesn't happen more often. But you know, they're busy writing another book. Like I would never write a book. I'd narrate a book, but writing, I'm not that kind of guy. I'm not programmed that way. Conquistador by Buddy Levy. It's a great story. Like I mentioned earlier, it'd make a great movie, but they would just ruin it. And but the poor guy that narrates it, I don't know what his name is, but he mispronounces a lot of things. But I got through it. The story is worth it. So it talks about that's obviously about Cortez's invasion of the Aztec Empire and what transpires, which I would imagine that just about everybody knows about it and kind of what happened, but there's lots of little details and wrinkles there that I had no idea. So very interesting story. If you guys have done any kind of historical podcasts, I'm sure you're familiar with Mike Duncan. Mike Duncan is the guy that did I believe it's called The History of Rome, and he did 1 week. He did an episode every week. The episodes are about an hour long, and he walks basically through the founding of Rome all the way through the fall of Rome, and 1 week at a time. His humor is, I enjoy it. I think that he does a really good job with that. I don't think he's a history professor. I could be wrong, but that's not what he does for a living, but it just kind of took off. And the next thing you know, he started doing these about 2004, 2005, 2006, something like that. Maybe I'm off a little bit, maybe 2008. But they were so popular that he would do every year he would do these tours where he would organize that, and he would do a history of Rome tour like in real life, and people could sign up for him, and he did that for a while. But I highly recommend his podcast. I believe it's called The History of Rome, Mike Duncan. And there's imagine it's a 1 week at a time, and it probably took them 4 years or something to do it. So there's a lot of episodes out there on that. I highly recommend them, and it's an easy way to, for me at least, I had basic understanding of the Roman Empire, and it was a good way to kind of get the basics right. So then when I wanted to read more about, oh, let me read more about Crisis of the Third Century or whatever it was that I wanted to read more about, I kind of had the basics down to kind of do that. He does a really good job of explaining how to do that. So anyway, so he came out with a book recently called The Storm Before the Storm, and this basically talks about how Julius Caesar, how the conditions were put in place so that Julius Caesar took over. Okay, so it talks about the social war and Marius and Sulla and all that kind of stuff. So, anyways, which will really make you wonder. It's like, okay, so I want to war game some of the social war stuff. So, what is the army list for the Italian allies in the DBA army book? Yeah, mystery, what exactly that would be. But anyways, interesting stuff on that. That's actually a short one. Another short one that came out relatively soon that, again, these are all books that I have finished all the way through. And, Mike Duncan does do his own book. So, you get the author and you get the narrator. So that's cool. Another one that is relatively new is a book called Legion versus Phalanx. And again, you think, oh, it's going to be really freaking boring, right? This one is really geared to us wargamers. It's an author called Mike Cole, and supposedly he has a military background. He was either in the service or just got out or something like that. So he's looking at things from the psyche of the actual people in the formation, and it's not just a type of study on the formations themselves, but how the Macedonian style phalanx and the Roman style legion developed, and how they performed in several battles. So it goes through Pyrrhus. It goes through all of his battles in detail. So if you're a big Pyrrhus fan like this guy, okay, it's really neat. And it goes through it doesn't touch on Carthage. It may have, but I don't think it does, because they don't really have a traditional phalanx. But it goes through all the Macedonian stuff with Philip V and when he encounters the Seleucids and that kind of stuff. So it's an interesting book. It's not a really long one. It's maybe 12, 14 hours, which is really kind of a short book, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, and it will happen again, unfortunately. But that's a good one. And let's see, what else do we have in the ancient land? Obviously, I've done Polybius. But the problem with Polybius is that there's a huge part of it missing. So I would recommend, instead of going back and people say, hey, read Polybius, and it's very readable, it's better to read something that has done after the fact that pulls from other sources, which unfortunately means Livy, but you got to take Livy with a grain of salt, because it's written several hundred years after the fact, and is the farther you go away from the actual event, the more inaccurate it could be. And he's, you got to take Livy with a grain of salt. It's kind of the Hollywood version of things, so to speak. But Polybius isn't bad. There's a book by, when I was on my, I was reading all these when I was doing my Romans, of course. So, I'm reading Roman-themed things when I'm doing my Roman painting. There's a book called Hannibal. I wonder what it's about, by a gentleman called Theodore Errol Dodge. Okay, and this was written right after the American Civil War, in the late 1800s. And this is a guy who was I believe he was an officer. I could be wrong. Again, I could be wrong. And he actually went back through Polybius, and he probably went through Livia as well. And he actually traveled to some of these places, and like was trying to find like which route that Hannibal went through the Alps. Really interesting guy. So there's a lot of as a lot of talking about how he came across and found some of these unknowns that we don't know about by actually visiting the sites. So he claims he went and visited these sites and retraced Hannibal's footsteps. So that's actually really interesting, especially the part of the Alps, because that alone could be, again, I'm going to use this loosely, that would make a really good movie. I don't want them to make movies because we want historical stuff, and people that make movies want to make a buck and maybe push an agenda. So that's not really, but you know what I'm saying. The story is incredible. So that is a good one as well. There is an author that was recommended to me called Peter Heather, and he has done several things. I think I have a couple of the books on him. Well, the one I finished is Fall of the Roman Empire. I remember liking it. Again, it was very digestible, really easy to get through, and that is one that I enjoyed. Because there's no real easy answer to what caused the fall of the Roman Empire. Yes, what caused fall of the Roman Empire? Yes, everything. Lots of things. So, and along with that, Adrian Goldsworthy's Fall of Carthage, that one was interesting as well. I don't remember where it started, and it was because I know where it ended, Fall of Carthage. Okay, but I don't remember if it goes through the First Punic War. The First Punic War is really, really interesting. It gets forgotten because Hannibal is just such a powerful, popular character, and so much has been written about him. But there are some really interesting things that happened in the First Punic War. Like in one of the situations in the First Punic War, and I'm not going to say names because I didn't take notes for this. I hadn't really planned on talking about this, which is how I roll. I am not a planner, but I bring you this in good faith, so I don't want to get the details wrong. But there was a Roman commander in the First Punic War who basically took the war to Carthage, and basically said that, let me think about this a little bit. They invaded actually Africa, and I think he got defeated, and they basically made terms with him. Like, it's been so long since I read this, but this just gives you an idea of how interesting some of these situations is. This Roman commander got captured, and the Carthaginians, he goes to try to negotiate, and so he goes back to Rome, and they don't want to deal with him. And instead of him saying, well, screw you, I'm just going to stay in Rome, he ends up going back to Africa and ends up getting executed. So talk about being loyal and standing up for something. But there's all kinds of interesting situations in there. One of the battles was, and this might have been the battle where this Roman guy was defeated. I mean, he wasn't an idiot commander. He just ended up getting defeated, because sometimes, you get headstrong guys that are just like, let's just go in and just take them out. And, you get surrounded, that kind of thing. But there was a commander. The Carthaginians weren't having a lot of good luck, and they ended up hiring this mercenary commander who was a Spartan named Xanthippus, and he actually commanded the Carthaginian army in Africa at one of these battles. And it may have been the same battle that I'm talking about where he actually defeated, but he ended up winning. And so the Carthaginians were, they had some core troops, but for the most part they were a mercenary army. And their generals had to perform, or else they would be crucified. So crucifixion is not a Roman invention necessarily. It's lots of people like to put people up on that. So there's a lot of interesting stuff about the First Punic War that gets kind of forgotten. The Rome didn't have a navy, so they built a navy, and they went in to have a huge naval battle and lost their entire they beat the Carthaginians at their own game, and then a storm comes by and destroys their entire navy. So what do? They build another one. Just stuff that unless you focus on that, if you showed this to people out on the street, it just seems like fantasy. It's like, why would you watch Game of Thrones? Because it's just the stuff that really happened in these that's almost forgotten, or just is just amazing. Just amazing stuff that you just can't even make up. So anyways, Fall of Carthage, that was a good book. I know Goldsworthy has all kinds of stuff. I just haven't gotten to the point where I've read a ton of his things. Just the one. So I recommend that one. I pretty much liked everything. There's only a few exceptions that I'm like, I don't want to read that again. Dan Jones, I got sucked into the Plantagenets. Excellent book, excellent subject, horrible narrator. The narrator just absolutely does not work for me. He doesn't want to be there, and I don't want him there. But the problem with Audible is, with a few exceptions, and it's mostly ancient texts, like maybe Livy or Polybius or something like that, there is one narrator. There's one selection for one book, and there's one narrator. So if you get one that doesn't work for you, you're kind of screwed, because it's not like, well, I'll wait till then it comes out with a different narrator. Almost all the time, it does not do that. So it's kind of hit or miss. But you do get to a little snippet there of like, usually like 3 minutes or so, so you can see, do you like the way this person is narrating the book, his meter, does he mispronounce things a lot, does he sound bored, is he going to put you to sleep when you're reading it, that kind of stuff. So Dan Jones, yeah, Plantagenets, excellent book, terrible narrator. The Crusaders that he did is excellent, because it's not only is it narrated by him, and he can write and narrate. There's better narrators than Dan Jones, but he's pretty good. Okay, so he gives emphasis when things need to be emphasized. But the way Crusaders is, you think, oh, another book about the Crusades. Well, they take kind of a linear approach. So it starts with the First Crusade all the way into the last ones. I think it goes into Battle of Varna and stuff like that. But he takes little snippets and little, almost like focused around characters, and they go into, so sometimes it'll be something in the Reconquista in Spain, or sometimes it'll be a Byzantine guy, or a Muslim chronicler, or so it takes it from all sides, and it's pretty much chronologically. So in other words, we're not talking about the stuff that happened in 1400 before we talked about the stuff in 1100. It's pretty much chronological, and it takes little vignettes of of really interesting things along the way. I highly recommend it. It's an excellent book by Dan Jones. And speaking of which, I haven't finished it, but I'll go ahead and mention I am doing the War of the Roses Dan Jones book right now. I'm like 85% of the way through. And again, this is something that I had very cursory information about War of the Roses. I'm not English. I didn't learn it in school. And not that it would have made a difference, but it just wasn't something that it's a very complicated, actually on the outside it's very complicated. The way he describes the book, it's actually really easy to follow. And I was surprised how little I knew about it. Like, I'd heard all these characters before. I had most of them anyways. I had heard of all the battles. I know all the battles. I just didn't know who fought who and who won each battle and what order they went in. Like, I knew that Bosworth was towards the end, but that was it. I didn't know any other ones. So it was fascinating for me understanding what order things went in, and who was on what side, and who backstabbed who, and I didn't know anything about Henry VI or Edward IV, honestly. And we just know about Henry Tudor and and Richard III, which is not even most of the book. So I highly recommend that book. Maybe if you guys are big fans of War of the Roses, maybe there's stuff that's wrong with it. Dan Jones just does a freaking great job of describing things. I think there's a couple more books by him. The Templars, I haven't gotten into that one. I haven't gotten that one yet. I don't know if I'm going to do it. It just seemed like a very narrow focused thing, and I'm not particularly interested in things that are ecclesiastically based. I think that's the word I'm looking for. Like, for instance, there's a book that I started reading that I didn't finish. It's called, I believe it's called In the Shadow of the Sword. It's by Tom Holland, right? I think I wrote that one down, or maybe I didn't because I didn't finish it. And it's basically the Byzantines, the Sassanids, and the and the Arabs, how the Muslim empire started to develop from that. And it's interesting, but a lot of it is religious based stuff, which I'm not interested in at all. I mean, I know it's important to the story, but it's not something that I'm particularly interested in. And so I started it, and there's parts of it that are really, really fascinating. But there's some parts that just aren't fascinating at all. So I am going to give it another shot because I did buy the book. There's nothing wrong with it. The narrator is not bad. It's just there's a lot of ecclesiastical. When books start getting into uh, iconoclasm or prophets, or that, I just I'm interested in warrior stuff because that's what I'm going to relate to on the battlefield. Yes, I understand it's important, but it's not important to me. I can't, I have a limited amount of interest. I can't be interested in everything. So that doesn't mean it's a bad book, but I just need to give it another shot. But he's also a very well-known author that I haven't really read anything by him from, but yeah, that's one I need to go back to that I never was able to finish, and that's why I wasn't able to finish it. Make sure I don't have them. Make sure I didn't miss anything here. And you like my new office. Okay. Have I read Bernal Diaz book on Cortez? He was a participant in the expedition. I have not. But one of those does the codex. Was he the one that did a codex? There's a codex that did the little drawings of the Aztec guys. At some point, I'm going to have a Tlaxcalan or probably not an Aztec army because Luke already has one, and I'll probably use all those little illustrations there for the shield patterns and stuff like that. Definitely interesting. You like my new office? Yes, it's the Camry office. Yeah, the Toyota Camry office. L versus P is on my reading list. Okay, Legion versus Fair. You'll like it because it's definitely war game related. It's probably the most war game related thing I've read. It definitely ties into all that stuff. So, that one's good. I mentioned to Marco the other day, there's one of the things that Audible also does is a thing called, and I don't like using this term because there's certain terms that evoke displeasure. And the term I'm thinking of, I think I just forgot what it is, lecture. Okay, there's lots of lectures on there. Yeah, but they're really good. And the thing about a lecture is these people have studied this topic that comes from all kinds of different sources. So now you don't have to read all those sources. Well, obviously you're taking this person's point of view, but it gives you a good rounded starting point for something. This one particular one is this professor called Kenneth Harl. He is a professor of Tulane University, and he is very easy to understand. He's very loud, and he's very animated in the way that he talks. So it's really easy to stay interested in it. He did a series on Alexander the Great that was just incredible. I thought it was really, really, really good. And it's very long. It's like 35 lectures or something like that, and they're each an hour. But it talks about all of the battles, and it's definitely war game. It talks about some coins and minting coins, and who cares about that? Okay, I mean I don't care about that, but it's very interesting. And I've listened to several of his other lectures. He's got lots of them on Audible, and I think he's very good. Some of them are better than others, but that one in particular is very good on Alexander the Great. Kenneth, I forget what his middle initial is. It's in there. Harl, Harl. What else? We're getting to the bottom of the list here. So some of you may know I have a maybe profound is the correct word, interest in naval wargaming. That's what I started off with. World War I, World War II. When I was in junior high, I went to the local library there at the school. Junior high, middle school is what we always called it. and they had all these books on the Battle of the Atlantic and the German raiders and all that stuff, and I was just fascinated by it, and built the models and all that stuff. This is like 12, 13, and then I discovered naval wargaming, and I'm like, oh great, now I can take part in this, perfect. And so I always had an affinity for all things naval, and if you go back on my channel and see one of the book reviews that I did on this book that my dad got in the early 80s growing up, that was always at our coffee table, and I would just go through it, and I knew everything. It's a great book if you're a lover of all things warship wise, before the aircraft carrier came and ruined everything. You know what I mean. We're interested in seeing battleships slug it out with each other, but you can check that out as well. But there's a couple of books, naval books that I've read that are particularly good. One of them is the Jutland Book by Nick Jellicoe, which I believe he is the grandson or great-grandson of Jellicoe. And at first I was a little skeptical because I thought, okay, well, this is going to be a propaganda thing about how his I forget if it's his grandfather or great-grandfather was so great or whatever, but I found it was pretty well-rounded on that. And it gave me a lot of stuff that I really was really interested in digesting. Now, the only gripe with the book is, and this may be the only book that I've read that does this, is the whole English system, or I should call it imperial system, and metric system. I don't have a preference. I do if we're talking about things that are very small. I don't really like, if we're talking about like how far things shoot, whether it's yards or meters, I don't prefer one or the other. It's almost the same damn difference. But every time he was talking about engagements in that book, and it happened a lot because, that's, would talk about, the battle cruisers would be this far away from each other. They would engage at this range. He would start off with 36,000, not 36, that's too far, 18,000 yards, and then he would say 17,647 meters or whatever. Every single time he mentioned one, he mentioned the other. It's kind of like when you're reading a sentence and you're reading some, and it'll say, if he or she, she, every time. It's like you're stumbling over and it messes up the meter of it. I wish you would have just picked one or the other. It's almost the same damn distance, and it doesn't really matter. When you're talking about long distances, metric is just fine. I don't have a problem with it. But other than that, I thought it was an excellent book, along with Castles of Steel by Masty, which unfortunately the Dreadnought is not on Audible, or it may be in the last month, but it hasn't, because I actually have the book Dreadnought, and I've tried to read it 12 times, probably, and I've gotten maybe a 12th of the way through, because I just can't. I distract easy, and it's not that the book is bad or difficult to read. It's just difficult to digest. Now, unlike ancient history, World War I, World War II, that's what I know. So when you're talking about all these cruiser ship classes, I've wargamed all that stuff. I know the armor factors of them. So I get a lot of that kind of stuff, and I don't find it confusing. So maybe for somebody who's not familiar with, the ships or what they look like or what kind of guns are on them or what have you, maybe slogging through something like a Jutland book is maybe not their cup of tea. But I have a feeling that if you're going to pick up a book on Jutland, you're kind of interested in it. But one of the interesting things about the Jutland book, I believe it was that one, because I've read several, and they kind of overlap, and I have similar material stuff that I've read throughout the years. But one of the things that is particularly interesting, at least to me, about the Jutland book is how little is done about the night action. The night action is like a battle in and of itself. And if somehow you could find out the condition that each one of the particular vessels is in, that would make a great war game, where the Germans are trying to break through the English lines through the middle of the dark. It just, again, you read that and you're like, man, why hasn't this been covered in a movie? But again, I use that as a grain of salt. You don't want them to screw that up. No. But anyhow, that is fascinating. And then Castles of Steel, of course, covers the entire war. the entire World War One, and that's of course fascinating as well. Um, and there is another book, and I didn't write it down here. Um, and oh, but this is an Audible book, right? That's right. We're talking about Audible books. So I have read quite a few books. The problem is nowadays I'm just distracted, and reading and reading is just so much more difficult. But especially when you have a crutch like Audible to just be able to just go for a ride and listen to a book. But there's one book that came out that was called The Naval War in the Mediterranean, and I don't remember what the author's name is, but he was a FSU professor, Florida State University professor, and one of the Wargamer guys that I know, Rick Parrish, actually took one of his classes, so he knew who the guy was, and that book is excellent. It's all World War One in the Mediterranean, so of course it talks about, well, and Black Sea as well. So it talks about the Goben and the Breslau when they got turned over to the Turks, or well, they were the Turkish ships, but they still had a German crew, and all the intercepts, and they did the mining operations they did in the Black Sea against the Russian fleets and that kind of stuff. It and encompasses everything else. That's an excellent book, but not on Audible, so I'll just be quiet about that. Castles of Steel is excellent because it covers everything. It's not necessarily Dreadnought based. It has all kinds of other stuff as well. And on that note, another book that is excellent on Audible is called The Kaiser's Pirates. It's by Nick Hewitt, and again, I'm going to say it again. This would make a great movie. So, I mean, if you have some basic World War One naval knowledge, you're going to know. And we're talking about Graf Spee's guys. For the most part, it's most of that. Most of the book is that. So you've got Emden and Scharnhorst and Gneisenau and Leipzig and Dresden. Anyways, the ones that went over there, I forget. One of them may not be there, but how they, the battles of Cornell, and Emden did its thing, and then it went. But after the Battle of Falklands, what happened to some of the ships? Like one of the ships, I think it's the Dresden, went back to Tierra del Fuego and was hiding in, like, I'm going to call them fjords, even though they're not fjords, the inlets there in the south of Chile, hiding from the British pursuit. I mean, that is like a book in and of itself. Just amazing, amazing, amazing stuff. I can't recommend that book enough. It is fascinating. The Kaiser's Pirates. It is definitely a really, really good one. And really, sometimes you read stuff and you're like, I really need to get into this gaming, or let me get my World War One ships back out, or something like that. And that was definitely one that I thought was really beyond fascinating. The initial action that the Emden did in when it sorted out, because Graf Spee's force, the squadron, went one way, and Emden went by itself, and it ended up going to a port in Indonesia. I don't remember exactly what the name of it is. But in that port, it attacked at night at basically point blank range. And there was like a French ship and a British ship and a Russian cruiser, and just really interesting stuff, that little vignettes of things that happened. That is an excellent, excellent book. I can't recommend that one enough. So that is, for the most part, most of the books that I have completed and or enjoyed on Audible, and they keep adding. I mean, I've got so many things on my wish list. It's ridiculous. I have to. I really need to pare that down and see. I've got a book on the Normans that I mentioned earlier today in my painting session, but it's only like 8 hours long. So I'm wondering, is this really that involved? There's a book that I read on the Byzantine Empire. It's only like 7 hours long. I'm like, okay, well, maybe this will give me some really detailed stuff. It left me wanting more. It wasn't detailed enough for what I wanted to do with it. So, it's hard to find things that are captivating fully in that sort of thing. So, what else do we have? Oh my gosh. All right, here we go here. Marco, there you are again. Highly recommend Happy Odyssey, the autobiography of Sir Adrian Carton de Wiart, VC. Is that Victoria Cross winner? The other is 6 Weeks, the short and gallant life of a British officer in World War One. Okay. Paul, welcome. You're currently listening to Custer's Trials by T.J. Stiles. Really good history on General Custer from his childhood to death. So I don't in case you haven't figured it out, I don't like American history. There's just not enough interesting people here on this continent. Sorry. At least for me. I mean, there's lots of people that like it. Like, I won't read anything about the American Civil War. It just doesn't interest me. But I did come across one book that I had read, that I had heard about for a long time. The Killing series by Bill O'Reilly. And I grew up in the time period of Ronald Reagan, and I decided to pick up the Killing Reagan book. And I thought it was fascinating. So much so that there's all kinds of ones. There's one on Lincoln, there's one on Patton. That's probably the one I'll do next. And the Kennedy ones or whatever. I thought those were really, books that are well written are ones that you can't wait to see what happens next. And they hop around, but they hop around to keep your interest going, but they don't hop around to confuse you or to figure out what's confusing in the timeline. So that one the Reagan book hopped around a lot, but I would confuse it a lot because I grew up in that time period. So I mean, I kind of know what was happening. But again, it's not a book that's just about an assassination. I mean, yes, it is pivotal to it, but it basically what leads up to it, why it happened, and the repercussions of it happening. Is it factual? I don't know. Some of these things, some of these political type books, you kind of wonder if somebody's trying to push an agenda. So I'm kind of skeptical. I don't like agendas pushed. I mean, I grew up at a time where you just turned on the news and you got the news. You didn't get, well, this is what the news mean. Come on, I can figure that out on my own, So, but I thought that book was particularly good. I didn't put it on here. I don't know why. Well, it's not war game related, So, yeah, but those are my recommendations so far, and even with that said, I still almost have 10 credits that I got to use. So the way the Audible thing works is you get a credit a month, you get charged $15 a month, and you get a credit a month, and you have like a year to use the credit. So I got to be really, when I get to 12, I'm going to be screwed, I need to go ahead and use the credit. But you can't cancel your subscription. You'll lose the unused credits. So like, say for instance, like I've got like 9 credits now. I'm like, okay, it's going to take me more than a year to figure this out. So I don't necessarily want to do that sort of thing and commit to specifically what I'm going to want to read next, because I don't know, just like I don't want to talk about what the next army I'm going to do when I haven't figured it out yet. So anyhow, you do need to, before you cancel that, you do need to make sure that you don't have unused credits or you end up losing them. And so I'm kind of running that risk, I'm closed in by, okay, I need to pick the book. I don't want to cancel my membership because I have too many credits, but I don't want to pick things. I don't want to lose the credits because it's been more than a year. But I don't want to pick books now to use my credits that want to get around to listening to them. It's not what I have in the forefront of wanting to listen to at that time. So it's just fine balance, I'm sure I'll figure it out, but anyhow, anything else? A lot of the public libraries offer all these audiobooks now for free. It's worth looking at saving a few bucks. Okay. I find it very hard to go to the public library. They're open at weird hours. And yeah, I'm basically consumed Monday through Friday. So on the weekend, it's like, fortunately, I don't work weekends because, I could. There's enough stuff to do, but I need time to be able to do this kind of stuff, therapy. So you like that Dreadnought? Yes, I have the Dreadnought book. And I've gone through very little of it, but it's not available on Audible, unfortunately. And yeah, and I definitely like Massey's content, definitely. So anyhow, I won't go back to simple explanations giving it to you in school. No, I'm a World War I nut or whatever. I love playing the Germans in World War One. I just do. I love the German World War One ships. I like playing the Commonwealth in World War Two, but the Germans in World War One. So anyhow, I wonder if there's some alternative. There's got to be some alternative history on there. What would have happened if Germany would have won World War One? You know, or if the Brits would have just stayed out. It would have been interesting to see what that is. But I guess again, it's just hypothetical. I don't like reading those things because then you start getting it. Who's the guy that does all those alternative history? That Turtle Dove guy. Like if the South would have won the war, and then they go into like World War II time period, and um, that kind of thing. So anyhow, that is my recommendation. My recommendation so far, it's pretty thorough. And as far as I did miss the Killing Reagan one. I got to read the Killing Patton one. That's got to be really interesting. I will mention one other thing about podcasts. So if you guys don't listen to podcasts, one of my favorite podcasters is this guy named Dan Carlin. Okay, Dan Carlin. He used to have two podcasts. He has one called Hardcore History, and he has another one called I forget what it was, but his was political, and I think he stopped doing that. I think he was doing it until Trump got elected, and I think he just didn't know what to do with it back then. But I liked his perspective. He's a libertarian guy, and I tend to be libertarian leaning. Let people do whatever the hell they want. Don't tell them what to do. I didn't mind his political thing, even though I don't really necessarily like to listen to political stuff. You like Dan Carlin. Okay. His Pacific series. So the best one that I've read so far is his World War One series. It's absolutely freaking amazing. I picked it up while I was power washing my driveway several years ago when it came out. It was long, and it was my only gripe with Dan Carlin is that he'll start an episode about, I don't know, let's say Napoleon, even though he hasn't done Napoleon. But say the subject is about Napoleon. So the first 10 minutes, he's building it up and doesn't even talk about it. It's almost like poetry, like he's just kind of getting you in. That's really my only gripe with him. I think that he's well-rounded, and he looks at things from other perspectives, and I don't think he's pushing an agenda, which I appreciate that a lot. But the Armageddon one is excellent. The Pacific one is excellent because I'm a World War II nut, but I'm not a Pacific World War II nut. So I know about all this stuff, but like I didn't know jack shit about the Bataan and the fighting in the Philippines. I didn't know anything about that because first of all, it's about the Americans in the Pacific. I'm bored. I'm not interested. I don't like. I've mentioned this before. I don't like playing the Americans. I'm already American. I've got nothing against this country. I'm just saying I'm already one of those. It's not a good way for me to role play. I like to role play a little bit when I'm playing military history type things, and that just doesn't allow me to do. I'm poof, you're American, So I tend to not gravitate towards that. Like I've read the book on Guadalcanal. There's a book, if you guys read World War II stuff, you know which one I'm talking about. It's about that thick. It's got a black cover on it. It's Guadalcanal. It's an excellent book. Like you think, man, Guadalcanal was really tough. Yeah, really tough for the freaking Japanese. Those guys were like, wouldn't have any supplies, and the stuff that they went through was just crazy. Not that I'm taking the Japanese side. I'm just saying, he is. That book is. I read that one. So I have gone through books. Just now in this point in life when I'm doing so much painting and I am not single anymore, I don't read really. I can't digest a book. But that Guadalcanal book is Richard Frank. Maybe it's Richard Frank. I don't know. Why would I remember that? I haven't read that book in like 20 years. Anyways, that was back when we were doing World War II gaming, and we did do Pacific stuff. And I like the Guadalcanal period because you've got the ability of having night actions and battle wagons on both sides, and it's still kind of fair. That kind of stuff. Man, I need some of this stuff right here. Richard Frank, what is that? I don't know. That book is excellent. That's an excellent book. But I really did not focus on the Pacific Theater because it seems there's points where you fall asleep after reading one page of a book. Yeah, it's unfortunately. And it's not because it's, for me, the funny thing is I'll go to a bookstore and my wife says, I got to go to the bathroom. I don't know what it is. It just relaxes my bowels. And I'm like, oh, I got to go number 2. So I'm like, hurry and head home. It's just too relaxing to sit there and read books. It's nothing against the books. It's just, it's a very zen experience. But yeah, it puts me to sleep as well. But the problem with the Pacific War, at least from my perspective, from a wargaming perspective, there gets to be a point where it's a foregone conclusion to the extreme. So, like, for instance, generally, you get to a point where almost in every situation, the Allies in World War II outproduce the Axis powers. That's just a fact, So they've got that going for them, and if you're dealing with something like the Russian front or something like that, for the most part, I know there's exceptions, for the most part, through much of the Russian front, the German units were more experienced, and they were, let's say they were better than the Soviets, but the Soviets could outproduce them. So you've got that counterbalance thing going on. If you go to if you do the Western Desert, I love the Western Desert. The Western Desert is just fascinating because it seesaws. Both sides are very interesting for different reasons. But when you go to the Pacific, you've got one side that basically has the jump on the other. And once that jump's over with, it's kind of a foregone conclusion because the U.S. cannot produce the Japanese. And it's very one-sided. So, for instance, I think it's much more balanced to read, say, a book on the Battle of the Bulge, okay, even though it was already a foregone conclusion, than to read something about, say, the Philippine Campaign, 1944, or the Marianas Turkey Shoot, or something like that. The Germans could put up, it seems like, more of a resistance than the Japanese could, in my opinion. Maybe not in Burma, because I really don't know much about that theater. But as far as the island hopping stuff, it was just kind of like, okay, so why am I reading this one-sided engagement? That's why I see it. Anyways, that's one reason I think World War I is really good, because World War I is an even thing all the way to the end. But anyhow, but not being focused on World War II in the Pacific, there was so much stuff in his book, in his podcast, that was just amazing. I had no idea. I didn't realize, I didn't know anything about MacArthur. I mean, I knew about MacArthur, obviously, but I didn't know about his personality and this kind of stuff. And how, I thought it was really fascinating. I thought it was really, really fascinating. And he does a really good job of, I like his podcast a lot. Now, a lot of people, the Countdown, what's it called? Countdown to Armageddon or something like that. The World War I one is excellent. The Pacific one is excellent. Some people rave about his Russian front one. I wasn't impressed because I live, breathe, and war game all the Russian front, so it didn't tell me anything new or didn't really go into that much depth. The Mongol ones, some people love the Mongol ones. I'm not a Mongol fan, and I'm not really interested in. It didn't really interest me that much. I didn't like his Persian one very much. So it's kind of hit or miss, but he definitely has the right speaking voice. He seems to be even keeled as far as he's not trying to really push an agenda or trying to, do anything really necessarily controversial. So I like his stuff. I like his common sense is what his political one was. Yeah, he's stopped doing that one. That's fine. I liked his political one, not because I like political things. I don't at all, because I think everybody's got alternate agendas. So I wouldn't do well in politics. Let's put it that way. But he gave you kind of a different perspective to look at it, and he was balanced. He wasn't. He didn't seem like he was corrupted, but it may not be true. But he stopped doing it anyways when Trump got elected. So probably because he didn't know which way to go with it. Probably for good reason. So World War I in the Pacific. Australians versus Germans in New Guinea and New Britain in 1914. That's something new for you. And there's cannibals there. There you go. There's a back and beyond for you, right? There's cannibals there now, so why wouldn't there be cannibals in World War I? Makes sense to me. But speaking of World War I, the odyssey that happened with, even if you've read about general stuff, like you've read about the Königsberg, that it went up the river and all that stuff, but it really goes, that Kaiser's Pirate really goes into details about, well, they pulled it up the river in the mud bank, this, and they went around, and guys were firing indirect to hit the ship. Just crazy stuff. You just couldn't make this stuff up. You know, that's why history is just so fascinating, because so many things happened that you don't have to make anything up. Just tell the freaking story as we know it. It is just fascinating. I've never read anything about the guy that was the German commander in Africa. Vetro Lobeck. So I'm probably bastardized his name. I'm not reading it, so I don't remember what it is. But the guy that went in there with the Ascaris and went and just ran around forever. I'm sure an account of what he was doing was really interesting. But that's one of those that when you start dealing with things that have a lot of places that are obscure, it's like, okay, let me get my atlas out and follow along. That's why there's a lot of really useful things on YouTube. There's a lot of garbage on YouTube, but there's a lot of really useful programming, like the Baz Battle stuff and the Kings in General stuff, where they talk about history and they use portraits, so you have an idea what the person looks like and you see where they are traveling on the map. I am very map minded, and maps really help me understand how things are in play and distance from each other. So I like all that stuff. So there's a lot of really good programming on YouTube as well. There's even some idiots that paint stuff in the mornings and stuff, but you know, they're not that good. They're just kind of doing that just to stay on track. But anyhow, so it is 9:30, and this has been about an hour long. So thanks for joining me, and hopefully some of you find some of those recommendations useful. And like I said, if don't take my word for it, listen to a little snippet of what's going on, of an example of what the discussion is or the narration is, and see if it works for you. I have stupidly gotten books without doing that, and well, I guess I probably would have never done the Plantagenets had I listened to that guy, but that's an excellent book. His narration just doesn't work for me. And it's not an accent issue, it's a meter. You know, the guy, you know, doesn't pause and write. I don't know. It just didn't work for me. But it's an excellent book. Dan Jones stuff is really good. So, anyhow, Victory at Villegas Bretonneux by Peter Fitzsimmons. Both sides of the battle that broke the German army in 1918. I've got a series by, I believe his last name is Brutar or something like that. And it is the Eastern Front in World War I in 1914. That's one book. Then 15 and 16 is another one. 17 through 18 is another one. And then it goes into the Polish and the Russian Civil War stuff. So I started digesting the first book, and it has a lot of detail. And I stopped listening to it because I wasn't going to war game it anytime soon. Not that the story wasn't interesting, but it was, and I don't think it was difficult to follow. But anyways, I still have it, so I'll pick it back up, you know. But anyhow, that's it for now, and hopefully you guys find some of these recommendations useful, and we'll catch you guys tomorrow morning for some more painting. So if you're interested in that, or just want to chit chat along or what have you, we should be on by 5:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I don't know whether that is, well, with the time change, I don't know if we're at Greenwich -4, Greenwich -5, or Greenwich -6. We're normally -5. So, but they keep playing with that daylight savings time. It's just like, just pick a time and stick with it. You know, make it easy, you know. So, anyhow, we will catch you guys next time. Paul, thanks for coming by, and the rest of you, and we'll catch you guys maybe tomorrow morning. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Bye-bye, folks.